Well, I guess that's it. I've built every possible deck in Magic the Gathering. Every commander deck, every standard deck, drafted every set. I've tried it all. And no matter what I do, it's just not quite me. It doesn't feel like my deck. Did someone say something more me? Enough of these tiny decks, this paltry combination of cards. Why, with a commander deck, you barely get 14 billion different combinations of hands. Magic the Gathering is an enormous game, and it deserves an enormous deck. No, we need something bigger, something with more variety. So put these away. Today, we're talking Cube. The Cube has no rules, no restrictions. We can do whatever we want. The Cube is a magical place where anything can happen. Cube is 360 unique cards that you draft with your friends to build whatever decks you possibly want. In Cube, you have 146 trillion combinations of possible Magic hands. That means if you were to draw a new hand every second, it would take you about 4 million years to get a repeat. It's really important to have a good acoustic cube. So get a group of your friends together and build the set that you wish Wizards of the Coast made. So pull up a chair, have a seat at the table, and whether you're a button mash hack and slash controller bash or a meeple moving mastermind of maps, mats, and minis, if you ruffle at the awful riffle shuffle scuffle, or if you're a click clack pick attack number ball luck sack, we're all here for the same reason. I'm Jake. Let's talk games. All right. So let's get into it. What is a cube? What does that even mean? Magic broadly has two main categories, limited and constructed. Let's start with constructed because I think that's the one that more people are familiar with, but that is simply any Magic event, and this can be playing with friends up to playing at a very high competitive level, in which you build your deck ahead of time. Usually there's restrictions placed on that in some sort of format or price or just general social composition, but you build your deck out of the cards that you want to play with. Limited, on the other hand, you don't get to choose those cards. Everybody is working with the same starting stuff, and whether that's drafting a few booster packs or starting with a pre-release kit and building your deck from those cards. There's benefits and cons to each of these, but to start with the pros, in Constructed, one of the big pros is that you really get to personalize the set of cards that you're playing with. You can make the deck do exactly what you want it to do. The cons of this being that it can be a little bit money driven. And if you're playing at a table with a big mismatch in how much people are willing to spend on the game, it feels a little bit pay to win. Limited, on the other hand, puts everybody at the same playing level. So that means, as a benefit, everybody's going to be working with roughly the same power level of cards. There's some bombs, and sometimes you'll end up with certain things that feel kind of unbalanced if somebody was able to get a lot of specific cards that work really well in the format. But generally, everybody has that same opportunity to build the right deck for the card pool. The cons, however, are that sometimes if you were less experienced than the other player, or you just don't get past the things that you need, or you're getting cut in a weird way, or somebody's not signaling properly, you can have issues in the draft. It can be a rough experience for a new player, and it can just be a rough experience in general if you happen to get unlucky. There's only so much you can do in a limited environment. Cube tries to strike a balance between those two aspects. It has the constructed element where you curate your own selection of cards. There's a lot of different ways to build a cube, but generally if you were playing with 8 people and you were planning on doing a draft format where everybody's drafting from their booster packs, you need at least 360 cards. Some people will run cubes that are smaller than this for fewer players or different styles of draft, and some people will run cubes that are much larger than this to accommodate multiple full tables of people playing at the same time, or just to have that variety where you're not drafting every card every time. My cube is closer to 400 to 450 cards. I think it's interesting when you don't have access to every single card every single time you draft, and so a selection of these cards is going to be left out every time we draft this cube. But like I said, this is the balance between constructed and limited. So I think we need to talk about how we design for a limited environment. This is something that Wizards of the Coast has done for a very long time and puts a lot of focus on in every set that has boosters intended for drafting. So this will be your draft boosters, your play boosters, or whatever they come up with next. In those boosters, something you'll notice is that the cards have a wide variety of power levels, and some of them are noticeably weaker. They're just bad cards. You would never use them in a constructed deck. You'd rarely use them in EDH. They're just filler. And at the end of the draft, you can probably just throw them out because they're also not worth anything. But it's important because it forces people to make choices about what types of cards they're including in their deck. Do they want to run just one color and use some of those suboptimal cards? Or do they want to run multiple colors to try to fit all of the powerful cards that they drafted or opened in their sealed pool into one deck? And I think when you build a cube, you need to build it with that in mind. Do you want to build a cube in which every card is a powerhouse and it feels like a collection of constructed decks that people discover over the course of the draft? Or do you want to include some bad cards and force people to make choices about how they build their decks as the game goes on? The beauty of cube is that there is no right answer. You build the cube that's right for you. The way I like to think about it is when you build a cube, you are building the set that you wish Wizards made. Whatever that happens to be. If you want, you can build the entirely Stormcrow Plague Rat cube, and everybody drafts either some variant of Stormcrow and or Plague Rat. But that's not very interesting, and your gameplay is going to feel kind of stale. But if you want that, you can do that. This gives you an immense amount of freedom for how you put together your set of cards. I'm going to walk through a few of the aspects of my cube that I feel is unique and describe my thought process for how I put the different pieces together to make this an interesting drafting experience. Alright, so starting off with the actual list, I think one of the benefits of Cube is that you can include cards and include strategies that don't really work anywhere else. You can have cards that are banned in Commander, you have cards that are banned in every other format in the game. If you want to run Scheherazade, you can run Scheherazade. So I'm going to separate out this section of cards, which I think is a representative sample of some of the unique things that exist within this cube, and kind of the things that set it apart. So I'm going to make a few piles here from some of these selections of cards that are a little weird and a little bit different than I think what you typically see in a cube. And then I figure we can end by talking about what the different colors in the cube actually do. So starting off at the front here, I have a selection, and this is just from the artifacts, of different uncards that interact in unique ways with the rest of the cube. I've talked about Sword of Dungeons and Dragons before, and I think you could pretty much play this sword in just regular casual Magic, but things like Jack-in-the-Box and Split Screen and Low Blobber, some of these are a little bit weirder. Jack-in-the-Box is a Mox of a random color, essentially. Split Screen gives you 4 libraries to draw from. Low Blobber goes infinite with itself if you are a lucky person. Krark's Other Thumb helps you be a lucky person. And Water Balloon Game adds a whole separate little mini game to the individual match. And so with these cards combined, I think we can have some interesting plays that you wouldn't normally be able to see in any regular Magic the Gathering game. Moving on to the next stack, this is a set of proxy fetch lands and dual lands. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is that when you were building a cube, you want to make sure that you have something for people to draft beyond just the powerful cards. So multicolored land allow them to get to multiple colors pretty easily. Powerful cards like Gaia's Cradle and Bazaar of Baghdad are kind of their own engine. You have things like Academy Ruins for the artifact recursion, Dark Depth Thespian Stage combo, and then I have a City of Traders and a Polymo. includes some of the other aspects of the game beyond just engine and payoff. Cards that produce multiple colors, cards that produce extra colors, and in that same vein, I am running the full power 9. I've just pulled the artifacts out, but Black Lotus and all 5 Moxen, in addition to a Mox Diamond, and a selection of other extremely powerful cards from throughout Magic's history. They're proxied in this. I don't really want to set many thousands of dollar cards in the hands of even my closest friends. I definitely don't want somebody to hand me a Black Lotus in a draft. I don't trust myself that much. But having some of those cards in here gives you some really strong, fun plays that you can make, and that's our whole goal, is making those big, splashy plays. So some of those random cards as payoffs, in addition to some really fast mana up front, make for some dynamic environments that you just don't get in regular Magic, no matter how competitively you play. Next up, we have some conspiracies. Now these came out in a set that was designed for multiplayer, so I've separated out just the ones that I think work well for a one-on-one game, as that is the intent of this cube. It's designed to be an 8-player draft and then one-on-one matches in the actual gameplay. These unsleeved cards, just in case you were wondering, are the tokens that the deck produces. So we can produce a wide variety of tokens, and the games get very weird. One of the things that these conspiracies do, though, is it changes the way that we build our deck. As an example, Sovereign's Realm means that we no longer have lands in our deck, conventionally. It means that we can draft the most powerful card every single draft pick. And that means that our deck is going to look very different from somebody who's going for a specific cohesive strategy. Weight advantage allows our creatures to deal damage with their toughness, and then we have a variety of other things that just change the way that we draft our deck. And the goal here is to break people into swim lanes so that when we are actually drafting, you don't have people fighting for the exact same cards every time. I think there's a tendency for certain people to end up with a split draft where the person next to them has a very similar deck and then they are just at a distinct disadvantage. Some of these cards help to split that up a little bit and give someone something else to focus on beyond just the colors of the cards. So moving on to a discussion of colors, the way that I built this cube was centered around specific abilities being bounded within certain colors. I really do want this to feel like the traditional color wheel of Magic, with each color kind of having their specific thing that they can do well. And so to walk through the colors, let's start with the allied colors first, and then we'll move on to some of the enemy colors after that. So starting with the allied color pairs, first up we have Teferi Time Raveler, and our white and blue is going to be heavily focused on generating that card advantage and slowing our opponents down. So Teferi is a good representative card for that. X, we have blue-black as our interact with heavily with our opponent and kind of just mess up their plans. So it's a lot of counterspells, a lot of removal, things like that. X is a weird card, but I think it works well in a draft format. I'd encourage you to play with some of these uncards because some of them fit really well into a draft like this. Then we have Terminate, again, red-black is very heavy removal. Fire Spout, we move that removal into damage between red and green. And our green here is just about doing big stuff. So we have a lot of ramp, we have a lot of large creatures, we have a lot of kind of unique abilities to just get us ahead of our opponent. And so you can see that getting ahead of our opponent loops back into this card advantage engine. Our enemy colors, you're going to see a similar distribution of abilities, with green-blue being adding counters and tokens to our permanents, Ajani being removal and going wide with creatures, Sorin, Lord of Innistrad being going wide with creatures and messing with our opponent's life total. So again, black is heavy on interaction and removal. Spiritmonger is a big creature. We are over the vanilla test significantly with Regenerate, and it just keeps getting bigger. The black on this is a little bit strange, but it adds Regenerate, so I think this is a good representative card, even though if it doesn't really fit with that removal aspect of black that we're trying to promote here. Pygmy Hippo, again, with Varel, just the things that add extra counters and help us get big quickly. And finally, a Dak Faden. Again, this is our removal and messing with our opponent's game plan. So within each of these colors, we see them kind of fit into these general categories. Some other themes that we have in here: red has a heavy goblin theme, black has a heavy removal suite and tutor with graveyard engines, and green does big creatures. We have some elves, but not very many. It's more on the druid side of things. And so the way that all of these cards interact together makes a somewhat cohesive environment. So if we are moving on to our 3-color pieces, again, we want these to be representative of the individual colors within. And so to start with the allied colors, we have Nekuzar the Mind Razor. This is our punishment for our opponents doing things, and just a way to really hamper whatever their deck is trying to do. Sphinx of the Steel Wind is a very effective big beater that keeps us in the game and just helps us sustain while we're trying to get our own engines online. Realm Razor is as aggressive as you possibly can make it. It sets your opponents back substantially and just helps you with that real aggro plan. Flesh and Blood does a good job of boosting our creatures while removing our opponent's creatures. And instead of including a Bant card, we're actually running Omnath, Locus of Creation. This fits really well with all of our fetch lands and is just generally a very effective card to have. So instead of the Bant value engine, which is something that I particularly dislike with a lot of cubes, we've moved that into this 4-color lane. A couple of random 5-color cards in here: Coalition Victory and the Who, What, Where, When, Why card that came out this is from, what is this, unsanctioned, but I believe this originally came out in one of the earlier unsets. So between the two of these, we have some things to do if we choose to go all 5 colors. In the enemy colors, we have a Sultai Charm, a Butcher of the Horde, a Siege Rhino, a Mantis Rider, and a Guided Passage. And so we have some of these cards that are a little bit representative of the colors that are in there, but more or less they represent good payoffs for splashing a 3rd color. So I would encourage you to build your own cube. And it doesn't have to be good. In fact, I think sometimes cubes are more interesting when the cards are bad, and people really get to experience building from pieces that don't fit together too well. Or you can build a cube that's all your own. Leave your signature on the gameplay. Show what you want a set to be in Magic the Gathering. I think it helps us be better deck builders, and it gives us a better appreciation for what it means to build an entire set. It's been really nice talking to you. Oh gosh, how are we doing? All right. Hey, props to those deck boxes. Not even this guy opened. I half expected this to be exploded all across the floor. All right. Okay.